14th century European art. There were a couple major events that contributed to the art of 14th century Europe. The outbreak of the bubonic plague in the late 1340s threatened the prosperity of this country and is seen as the worst natural disaster Europe has ever encountered. The plague eliminated between 25 and 50% of the continent's population in about 5 years. The plague stimulated a lot of religious art and the ordering of devotional images. One more significant development during 14th century Italy was the development of a vernacular literature. This was a noteworthy sign that the primary religious views which dominated during medieval Europe were about to change, and Europe was about to go through a renaissance. Renaissance meaning a rebirth of art and culture. For this time frame, I'm going to focus specifically on the great artworks of Giotto and Duccio. Giotto di Bondone was born in a farmhouse around Florence, Italy. He was the son of a blacksmith. Giorgio Vasari described Giotto as a shepherd boy, a merry and intelligent child who was loved by all who knew him. The great Florentine painter Cimabue discovered Giotto drawing pictures of his sheep on a rock. They were so lifelike that Cimabue approached Bondone and asked if he could take the boy as an apprentice. There is still debate over the sources of Giotto's style, but Cimabue must have been one of Giotto's stronger influences. At age 20, he got married and he and his wife had several children. He worked in Rome around 1297 to 1300, and from there on out his fame as a painter spread. He was called to work in different cities, and according to documents of 1301 and 1304, by this time Giotto possessed large estates in Florence, and it is probable that he was already leading a large workshop and receiving commissions from throughout Italy. He is regarded as the first Renaissance painter, and one of the beginners in pursuing a naturalistic approach with his artwork. Naturalization meaning representation based on his observation of nature. Some scholars note Giotto to be the father of Western pictorial art and that he eclipsed his master by deserting the crude maniera greca. Duccio is first mentioned in 1278 when the treasurer of the Commune of Siena commissioned him to decorate 12 strong boxes for documents. He was requested again to do more work of the same, even though this type of work was more appropriate for an artisan, should not fool anyone into thinking Duccio was only a beginner. It is a fact that this type of work was requested both in Siena and Florence of already established painters. In 1280, Duccio was fined 100 lire by the Commune of Siena for some unrecorded misconduct. This was the first of a larger number of fines Duccio incurred, which suggests Duccio was of rebellious temperament. The works of Duccio represent Sienese art at its most supreme. He was one of the most influential Italian artists. Duccio is credited with creating the painting style of Trecento in the Sienese school and contributed significantly to the Sienese Gothic style. Giotto's Lamentation showcases his groundbreaking innovative style very well. Gardner's Art of the Ages states, in the presence of boldly foreshortened angels seen head-on, with their bodies receding into the background and darting about in hysterical grief, a congregation mourns over the dead Savior just before his entombment. Giotto set the stage with a thick diagonal rock incline, defining a horizontal ledge in the forefront. The ledge provides strong visual support for the figures. The postures and gestures of Giotto's figures convey a broad spectrum of grief. In Lamentation, a single event provokes a host of individual responses in figures that are convincing presences both physically and psychologically. Painters before Giotto rarely attempted, let alone achieved, this combination of naturalistic representation, compositional complexity, and emotional resonance. Duccio's most famous painting is his Maesta. The Sienese believed the Virgin had brought them victory over the Florentines, and she was the center focus of their religious life. When Duccio completed his masterpiece in 1311, the whole city celebrated. Duccio's prominence was so great that the church officials allowed him to include his name on the Virgin's footstool. The main panel on front of altarpiece represents the Virgin enthroned as Queen of Heaven amid choruses of angels and saints. Duccio derived the composition's formality and symmetry from Byzantine tradition, but the artist relaxed the strict frontality and rigidity of the figures. He individualized the faces of the four saints kneeling in the foreground and softened the usual Byzantine hard body outlines and drapery patterning. His changes revealed his interest of the naturalism movement, but he still respected the age-old requirement of Maesta being an altarpiece, and as such would be the center of attention at Siena's largest church, its cathedral. Duccio's work presents a significant alternative to the style of Giotto. Just as Giotto will dominate the Florentine school for much of the rest of the 14th century, Duccio's style will dominate Sienese art. A good way to get a grasp of the different styles is to compare Giotto's Madonna to Duccio's Madonna. Ironically, the Rucellai Madonna was apparently commissioned by the Society of the Virgin Mary, or the Laodice, in Florence. The work was later incorporated into the Rucellai family chapel in the Church of Sta Maria Novella in Florence. Remember that this work is currently hung in the same room as the Ognissanti in the Uffizi. In Duccio's picture, the head of the Madonna is still enclosed. Mary seems more gentle, but holds her head inclined, just as Cimabue painted. Little Jesus is not wearing a heavy robe as in earlier pictures, but a light shirt and flesh colors. He does not hold his hand as a blessing anymore, and Mary has her hand on his knee in a tender caress. She is not solemnly showing the child. The scene is more intimate and more elegant, more refined. Giotto's Madonna is very different. Mary is still robed in the Maphorian, but there is still no gold to indicate the folds. There are more shades of color here than in the previous Maista. The robe is half open, and we see shades of Mary's chest. She is a real woman now, less a heavenly queen. This must have brought her image more intimate to the viewers, more close to their everyday world, and the Giotto picture of the Byzantine damp-folded style is abandoned. The shirt of Jesus has become almost entirely transparent, but the anatomy of the child seems somewhat clumsy. Jesus' body is too robust, his legs too thin, and the shirt clings artificially around the child. Anatomy was not the strength of Giotto. Giotto was an incredible artist, viewed as the most important Italian painter of his time, whose original ideas pointed to the innovation of the Renaissance style. His masterwork was the fresco style of the Arena Chapel, which included the panel Lamentation. His fresco style was one of the most complete and extraordinary Christian pictorial cycles ever made. Duccio was an amazing Italian artist as well. His most accomplished art is the aforementioned altarpiece called the Maista. The Maista was an incredible feat. It consisted of the 7-foot-high central panel with inscriptions, 7 pinnacles, a raised shelf with panels at the base of it, altogether about 13 feet high. Both Giotto and Duccio made radical strides in the world of art, and without them, the art and culture of 14th century Europe would not have been as rich.